everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, the latest in the Turkey-US Business Council's excellent series, Transatlantic Talks. It gives me great pleasure to welcome our keynote speaker and special guest, Dr. Mark Mobius. Thank you, Mark.
Pleasure.
I would like to make a few brief remarks before I turn the discussion over to Çağlan. In a time when social distancing measures remain in place to ensure our safety and well-being, it is encouraging to see that our nations continue to strengthen economic and intellectual ties. Personally, I am thankful to be a part of the Transatlantic Talks series, reinforcing the bridges built between the people of Turkey and the United States. Keeping our relations close now will enable us to walk those bridges towards a better future together. Regarding international investments, TAİK agrees with Dr. Mobius that Turkish assets have long been undervalued, and now it is time to buy into Turkish companies. We strongly believe that Turkey will quickly recover with our young population and dynamism. How? Well, first, our role in the international supply chain, particularly in defense and aerospace, is enormous. We also believe that we can play a key role in Africa, teaming up with the United States to slow Chinese economic influence over the continent. In regards to dealing with adverse effects of the pandemic, I agree with Dr. Mobius that emerging markets have the capacity to recover much faster than larger economies. Having spent years in the region, Mark has great knowledge of the history and financial infrastructure of Turkey. Our geographically strategic location presents a great opportunity to companies and investors for rapid expansion and access to neighboring markets. As a Turkish businessman, I am delighted to hear Mark's thoughts on the matter. His expertise in investing in Turkey is also greatly complemented by his history of praising Turkish food and culture. Now, I leave the floor to our moderator, TAİK's ATC Committee Chairwoman, Ms. Çağlan Mursaoğlu. Thank you, Çağlan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your kind introduction. Good afternoon and good morning to you all, ladies and gentlemen, who are participating in today's webinar from all around the world. It's a great pleasure for me to moderate TAİK's second Transatlantic Talks webinar, featuring a special guest, the godfather of emerging markets, Dr. Mark Mobius. Before I introduce him, please allow me to give a brief description of Turkey-US Business Council, TAİK, for those who may not be familiar with. As the first bilateral business council ever established in Turkey, TAİK has been organizing events and conferences in support of its works around its core mission, which is to enhance trade and economic relations between Turkey and the United States. In these challenging times, Turkish and American cooperation is more important than ever, because there is no doubt that we will be living in a different world when the pandemic is over. We as TAİK aim to overcome the social distancing through Transatlantic Talks webinar series and solidify the spirit of our cooperation. Today, I would like to express my special thanks to Dr. Mark Mobius for joining us. Mark, it's a great opportunity to have you, and it's a great pleasure for me to moderate. Mark is a great friend of mine and great friend of Turkey. His life is full of accomplishments, and he has a reputation as one of the most successful managers over 30 years. In May 2018, with his two ex-colleagues, he has launched Mobius Capital Partners. The firm uses a highly specialized investment approach with an emphasis on developing and improving corporate governance in emerging and frontier markets. As many of you know, before launching Mobius Capital Partners, Mark was with Franklin Templeton Investments for over 30 years, most recently as the executive chairman of Templeton Emerging Markets Group. During his leadership, the group expanded its assets under management from $100 million to $40 billion and launched several emerging and frontier market funds focusing on Asia, Latin America, Africa, and Eastern Europe, including Turkey. He's also a member of the Economic Advisory Board of IFC, and also he serves as a supervisory board member of OMV Petrom in Romania and was previously a director on board of Lukoil. As last year, his latest book, I'm going to show you, yes, his latest book, Invest for Good, A Healthier World and a Wealthier You, was published, where he co-authored along with his firm's 2 other founding fathers. Well, without further to say, let me turn to our distinguished guests. Mark, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Now, I would like to start with my questions. Well, I know you have been investing in emerging markets since '87, and you have traveled all around the world, and you still spend most of your time visiting companies. When no one talked about China this much, and China was only an emerging market, you were investing in China. China, a communist country at the time, now becomes a superpower. Relying on your vast knowledge, in the post-COVID-19 world, how do you see the trade relations between China and the United States?
Well, first of all,
go on, please.
Yeah, first of all, I think regarding the trade relations between China and the US, it's certainly not going to stop because both countries are dependent upon each other. Trade will continue, but it will be at a different level, simply because the disparity between the 2 countries in terms of balance of payments is quite large. In other words, China exports much, much more to the US than the US to China. So that is the problem that will have to be confronted and is being confronted by the Trump administration. But trade will continue between the 2 countries. And I believe that eventually they'll be able to work out a system which will be beneficial to both sides.
How do you think it's going to impact emerging markets? Do you think Turkey can benefit out of it?
Yes, actually, it's already beginning to benefit other markets simply because since the tariffs for Chinese goods have gone up for a number of items, other countries who don't have this tariff disadvantage will be able to export to the US. So you're seeing a number of countries increasing their exports to the US as a result of this trade war. The interesting thing is that many Chinese companies are moving to other countries in order to manufacture in those other countries and get under the tariff wall going into the US. So there is a great opportunity for Turkey to acquire some of this trade that China is not able to access. And one of the ways of doing that, of course, is to tie up with Chinese manufacturers and move some of the manufacturing to Turkey, as well as, of course, improving relations with the US and improving exports from Turkey to the US with new products, innovations, better ideas, and of course, all kinds of opportunities will arise as a result of better communication between the 2 countries.
I see. Thank you, Mark. Well, my second question would be, most people see COVID-19 pandemic as a situation that's going to change life, businesses, investment preferences, behavior, and the world as we know it. How do you think the investment community will adapt to it, especially In your last book, which you have co-authored with your colleagues, namely Invest for Good, A Healthier World, A Wealthier You. I think the essence of the book makes it a must read nowadays. Because,
Yes.
I mean, do you think there will be more investors preferring to invest in socially responsible companies with better corporate governance after what we have been through? If it's the case, then what do you advise our C-level executives in Turkey going forward? Thank you.
Well, there's no question that there will be greater and greater interest in ESG, environmental, social, and governance, particularly governance issues, because one of the things that this pandemic has taught us, not only governments, but also companies, is that we've got to be prepared. And that means you've got to have good governance to be prepared to look ahead and think about what could happen to your company as a result of a variety of crises. And don't forget, this is one of many, many crises that have been prevalent in the world over the years since 1987, when we started the Emerging Markets Fund. As you know, we had all kinds of crises. The difference this time is that it's truly a global crisis, and the spread of the virus, as well as the spread of the information, has been much, much greater than ever before. So a lot of people talk about the world becoming more separate, countries going their own way. No, that is not the case. What is really happening is that the world is becoming much more global, and communications between countries is increasing rapidly. So there is an opportunity here for better cooperation globally, better relations globally. And of course, this crisis will end just like any other crisis. They all end at one point, and there'll be opportunities to recover and actually do better going forward.
Yeah, thank you. Is it certain that some sectors will stand out after COVID-19? Which ones are most and or least favorite of yours?
Well, first of all, the most favorite, of course, with anything regarding health. It could be hospitals, it could be testing agencies, it could be any kind of medical intervention, medical equipment, etc. Those are areas that are going to achieve a lot greater attention from the buying public. That includes health foods as well, etc. And of course, all kinds of services that are designed to improve the health of people, whether it be exercise programs or diet programs, whatever. So that's one area. The other area, I believe, is more related to the incredible increase in communications and technology. So the big opportunities are going to be in those companies which heretofore have led a sort of traditional life, in the sense of their distribution systems, their supply chains have been more traditional. And going forward, those companies in that category that are able to switch to internet-related technology and also improve productivity through technology will do very well. And those are the companies we want to keep an eye on.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Well, as massive amount of liquidity is being pumped into the global system, I mean, all through my life, I have never seen this much money being pumped into the system. I didn't live in Great Depression, so I have no idea whether it was the case. But how do you see its impact on global economies across the world? Will it favor, again, emerging markets? Which assets would be most popular? And do you think central banks will lure funds into the gold?
Actually,
and what do you think of gold as a commodity?
Gold, of course, is a favorite of mine. I believe that everybody should have gold, at least 10% of their portfolio in gold. But this incredible avalanche of liquidity is going to be very good for equity markets, of course, because if you have so much liquidity, then you're going to see prices rising. And the best protection against this is equities, because equities will adjust to these rises. The other benefit, and that includes emerging markets, is that many companies that are in financial difficulty as a result of the COVID-19 crisis will be benefited. They will get the liquidity they require to survive and move ahead. One of the other aspects of this development, of course, is that many companies will go bankrupt. There will be a general, how can I say, house cleaning of companies that are really not competitive and not capable of competing in this world. They will fall by the wayside, and some industries will see consolidation as a result of that.
I see. Okay, I want to show you your chart. Actually, I've seen that you've looked at Turkey since 1987. And there was a chart. Let me show to the audience as well. Just a second. Yeah, this one. Yeah, here, I mean, can we say that we have seen the bottom? This is your chart. I took it from your website.
Right. Well, the nice thing about this chart, as you can see, is that Turkey has had lots of bear markets. The reason why I say that's nice is because it's given us great opportunity to buy at the bottom and hopefully sell at the top. This is one of the big benefits of investing in Turkey, is that you know that these bear markets are not going to last very long. And when the bull market begins, the upside is tremendous. And so I can say that the bear market in Turkey already has begun to move into a bull territory. Of course, there will be setbacks from time to time, but at the end of the day, there's going to be a lot of opportunity in Turkey to buy very inexpensive stocks.
Yeah, that's true. Thanks. Hopefully. Well, U.S. Central Bank, I mean, coming to Turkey, U.S. Central Bank established swap lines with its counterparts, but unfortunately, no swap lines have been extended to Turkey, whose budget deficits have reached by the end of the year 3%, 3%, but now it looks like, I mean, if you forget the one-off gain, it looks like we have the 5% budget deficit of GDP, and our currency became more fragile. As more and more countries apply for IMF and some others try to shore up finances via swap agreements with other central banks, Turkey has so far been on the sidelines. What steps do you think will have the most impact to bring back investor confidence? Because year to date, so far, I think 6 billion from fixed income and 3 billion from equities have left Turkey year to date. So what should the authorities or government do to establish back the investor confidence?
I think one of the most important aspects is the program to look at a massive employment program. The biggest problem and challenge facing Turkey and some other countries as well, including the US, is employment. Unemployment has gone up dramatically. As a result of the crisis, many of the jobs that are lost will never be retained, will never return. So I would think that the best prospect for Turkey would be to start a massive infrastructure program. I'm thinking of the Southeastern Anatolia project. As you know, that was a massive program of dams and irrigation. And I think that kind of program would be very advantageous. And the reason why I say that is, first of all, a program like this will employ many, many people. So the economy will begin to grow again. Number two, the finance for such a program can be raised locally to begin with, but as it gets going, it will attract outside investors, particularly companies that want to supply equipment and otherwise supply various inputs to such a massive program, will really push the economy ahead and will draw in investments. So I think that's the kind of program that will be quite beneficial for Turkey and quite appropriate, because Turkey has the resources, the human resources, the know-how, the experience to do such massive programs.
Thank you, Mark. Well, another question of mine would be, as demand has fallen off a cliff across the globe, we have seen the impact on commodity prices. The oil prices collapse. And how do you think it's going to shape the global economy a few years from now? Do you think the current crash in the oil prices are due to just to the lack of demand, or it's because of the shale gas and the government policies? What does it mean for the economic power ladder across the world? Can you comment on it, and oil's impact on the emerging markets as well?
Well, the decline in oil prices has been a wonderful thing for many emerging markets, including Turkey. As you know, Turkey imports a lot of oil. So this development has been very, very positive for Turkey, for India, for China, and a number of other countries. So that's the first thing. Now, the reason for the decline, first of all, is this sort of war between Russia and Saudi Arabia as regards to how much they should be able to put into the market. The other factor, of course, has been the fracking in the U.S., which has been able to improve production in the U.S. dramatically, making the U.S. the largest producer in the world. In addition, mostly because of this COVID crisis, demand has gone down. If you consider that in the U.S., at least 70% of the oil demand goes into transportation fuel, automobile, truck, bus fuel, then you realize that with no one allowed to go out of their homes, they're not going to see much consumption of this gasoline, diesel, and so forth. So that will be over by the end of the year. Things will be back to the normal, I believe, and the demand will go up, and probably the price will move up. So I would advise Turkey, if they have the resources, to stock up on as much oil now as possible.
Yeah, since we're a net oil importer, it would definitely be beneficiary for us. But lira is, at the same time, lira is losing value as well. So therefore, well, it will make up for it, because the crash in oil prices are much more severe than the lira's losing ground, I guess. Yeah, hopefully. Well, when the pandemic first started in China and Chinese economy started to lock up, to shut down, a supply chain problem emerged for global companies. So when the global economy gradually restarts, and companies are definitely expected to address the supply chain problem, not to be dependent on one source. How do you think Turkish companies should position themselves to take advantage of the current situation? I mean, will it? Can we provide? I mean, can we have some sort of advantage? What do you think?
It's very appropriate that we're speaking in a Turkish-American venue here, because relations between Turkey and the U.S. Are very important for Turkey and the U.S. But it's very critical that the Turkish diplomats improve relations with the U.S., and particularly as regards to trade. And one idea, of course, would be to have a free trade agreement with the U.S., or at least a type of agreement that Turkey has with Europe. So that's the first thing that is very important to work on. And there's no reason why that can't be done, because Turkey has lots of things they can export to the U.S. That the U.S. does not produce in quantity. And there are many things that Turkey can do in terms of producing components for U.S. firms. So the supply chain problems that many U.S. firms had with China now have to be solved. And that means diversifying away from exclusive dependence upon China. So that gives an opportunity for Turkey to step in and take part of that supply.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Well, one more question of mine would be, which sectors do you think will come forward in Turkish markets? I mean, and what should be the ideal allocation for an investor going forward globally?
Well, globally, it should be, of course, equities. That's the prime kind of opportunity that you have now. But also for Turkey specifically, at least in the short term, emphasis should be put on the areas I just mentioned, but also export-oriented companies, companies that are going to be earning foreign exchange. This is a critical issue, as you know, for Turkey, and there's a great opportunity for these companies to export competitively simply because of the decline of the Turkish lira. That is a blessing for Turkish exporters. So I would think that the export segment is going to be more and more important.
I see. Well, thank you, Mark. I have no further questions, actually. With that, we are within our promised time limits. It was a great pleasure to have you, and I was delighted to hear your thoughts. I'm sure our guests were also. Mr. Chairman, thank you for leading TAİK's Transatlantic Talks webinars. For those who joined us late, Mark's latest book, Invest for Good, A Healthier World, Wealthier You, is available on Audible for us. Hopefully, Mark, you would arrange it and it will come to Turkey soon. So
Okay.
if anyone wants to, anyone is interested in investing their money profitably, but at the same time doing good for the world, then you should definitely read it. I'm going to download it from Audible, by the way. I haven't read it yet. And once again, thank you for joining us. Please make sure you follow our Twitter account, TAİK official Twitter account, for upcoming webinars and other announcements as well. I wish a healthy, safe rest for the rest of the week. Stay safe. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you.